So what are Ukraine and Russia up to again? The war has been going on for more than 4 years. We're a few months into the fifth year, and today we'll take a look at what's happening on the front, what's happening behind the front lines, where drones and missiles have struck, and we'll also check out some political and economic indicators and things that are happening. So if you want to know more, like, share, and comment on this video. And don't forget that on your phone, you can give it a so-called highlight star, which will send this video to more people and increase its reach. It doesn't cost anything, so please do it right now. And let's take a look at what's happening, not directly on the front line, but what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. Let's start with how the Russians have attacked Ukraine over the past week. And according to data from official sources, at least 1,151 drones and 47 missiles have been sent to Ukraine. So that's a total of 1,198 aerial vehicles. Ukraine managed to destroy about 1,027 drones and 30 missiles out of these aerial vehicles. So in total, they managed to destroy 1,057 out of the 1,197. That means the success rate of Ukrainian air defense against drones was around 90%, exactly 89%. And when it comes to missiles and rockets, the success rate was about 64%. A fairly high success rate with drones, above average. When it comes to nearly 90% success, that's something even the Israelis don't achieve. When it comes to the ability to shoot down missiles, it was rather below ideal, because let's say if the success rate is higher than 70%, that's very good. Very high quality. Here, the Russians managed to push the Ukrainian air defense success rate below 70% to 60%, just under 64%, which means that Ukrainian air defense against missiles
ne pohořela, ale nezazářila.
As for the damage caused by these massive Russian attacks, here we can immediately see a report that 10 people were killed and 67 injured during the massive Russian attack on Dnipro and other cities across Ukraine. This happened on the 25th April, when the biggest attack in the past week took place, and it was truly a massive tragedy, with a huge number of people dying. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and overall, of course, there were problems with electricity and fuel supplies again, so it created a huge problem. Besides that, of course, ports were also targeted throughout the week. Ports, for example, in the attack on Odessa. There, the Russians managed to kill 5 people and, of course, damaged the logistics of the ports and Ukraine's logistics. A ship flying the flag of Palau was also hit. So this also happened when the Russians attacked Ukraine with their drones. There was heavy loss of life and many injuries, with the attacks mainly targeting residential areas, especially those near ports and logistics centers. As for the attack on those residential areas, it's always a bit strange. It's hard to say whether it's intentional or not, but of course it's always the Russians' fault, because they shouldn't be firing at residential areas at all. The only thing that could theoretically be said is that the Ukrainians should have anticipated this in some way and could have prevented it by moving the logistics out of the cities. But ports are hard to move, right? And when the Russians attack the ports, it often happens that they hit civilian targets, which in itself is, of course, a Russian crime. There's nothing you can do. However, it's not just the Russians who are attacking. The Ukrainians have attacked as well. And the Ukrainians struck targets. They have launched at least 500 drones at Russia in the past week and managed to hit, for example, the Slavneftjanus refinery in Yaroslavl. Overall, fires are also being reported from the Vologda and Crimea regions. Other important strikes were the ones in Tuapse. The large refinery in Tuapse, which is, let's say, a producer or processor of up to 12 million tons of oil per year. And these massive strikes, which cause massive fires, are spreading across Russia as news, and it looks very, very impressive. So at the moment when this is happening and you see the way the biggest or one of the biggest refineries in the country is burning, it undermines the Russian perspective. A lot of Russians right now are talking about how, wow, maybe some form of mobilization should be carried out. And especially Russian military bloggers are talking about the need to carry out mobilization and that the country needs to be plunged even deeper into war mode so that those mobilized would primarily serve as protectors of those refineries and the critical Russian infrastructure, which, as it is being destroyed, of course, means Russia is losing a huge amount of its ability to produce petroleum products and even export oil. And of course, this obviously harms the Russian budget and Russia's ability to wage war. As for these refinery strikes, it's very effective because when you hit a refinery and the places where fuel and petroleum products are produced, not only do you destroy the products themselves and significantly limit the ability to carry out refining, but you also destroy what you might call intangible assets. By that, I mean values that aren't tangible in the sense that you could physically break them, but they have been created. By that, I mean, for example, when you take a canister of oil, a proper canister of oil, it first had to be extracted. That's some work that has to be paid for. Consider that you have to pay those people, you have to pay for those machines. Then the oil was transported. That's more work. You had to use fuel to transport the oil. You had to pay the driver. You had to pay for the truck's maintenance. Then the oil was pumped into the refinery. It went through the refining process. It's practically finished, processed, and suddenly someone hits it with a drone, which causes the whole product to explode or burn. And at that moment, you've basically completed the entire chain of work. You've paid for extraction, you've paid for transportation, you've paid for refining, and the final sale doesn't happen. Therefore, the loss is enormous, and it's much greater than if, for example, the Ukrainians bombed the oil wells directly. That's one of the things. So, yes, bombing refineries is actually a very good idea, and it's much more effective than bombing oil wells directly, because not only are you destroying the raw material and the product, but you're also devaluing the work of those people, those Russians, that was put into it and could have been put into something else that might have made money. Destroyed oil that you can't sell or destroyed oil products that you can't sell simply won't make you any money and still cost a lot to produce. So the loss is multiplied by that. So yeah, this is something the Ukrainians have been successful at. Now let's take a look at the front. The most interesting events on the front are happening, of course, as we're used to, in the Donetsk region, specifically around Konstantinivka, where according to the deep state map, the front isn't really moving much. If we look at the changes over the past week, they're practically non-existent. There's really no significant movement over the last week, but there are a lot of clashes happening there. In the last 24 hours, there have been about 226 clashes along the entire front, and that's simply a large number. Overall, the intensity of drone activity on the front is also very high. For example, in the last day, it was reported that 5,000 drones were used on the front, Russian drones like FPVs and so on, and 151 glide bombs. That by itself is really an almost unimaginable amount. Simply thousands of drones, hundreds of bombs, even though it's spread out along the front. Of course, most of the activity is concentrated around Konstantinivka and then also in the direction beyond Pokrovsk. As for the direction beyond Pokrovsk, we've seen relatively little development over the past week, but the Russians are at least managing to expand their advance beyond Pokrovsk. We can see that right now the fighting is taking place over the villages of Rodinske and Novo-Oleksandrivka. These are small villages beyond Pokrovsk. What's quite interesting is that beyond Pokrovsk there are fortified lines, those multi-layered lines of various minefields, anti-tank ditches, wires and everything else, which helps slow down the Russian advance. It's important because even though in those fortresses or in those fortifications,
Nejsou přímo nasáčkovaní vojáci,
the fortified positions and fortifications themselves serve as something that slows down the Russian advance in case of an attack. And that means that
ukrajinský dělostřelectvo nebo dronaři
they have much more time for a possible redeployment and to focus fire on the given sector. If the fortifications weren't there, of course the Russians would have many more options
provést nějaký překvapivý útok
and how to get into the depths of Ukrainian territory from where it would then be difficult to drive them out. Because those fortifications are there, it reduces the Russians' ability to carry out a quick surprise raid attack. Of course, they will try to bypass those fortifications somehow, but you, as Ukrainians, know where those fortifications could theoretically be bypassed, and the places that are weaker, you will keep under closer watch. I would also like to mention and emphasize what I said a moment ago, that the soldiers really aren't crammed into those fortifications. Don't imagine it as just trenches, anti-tank obstacles, barbed wire, and in those trenches one soldier next to another and machine gun nests. It's not really done like that, and the reason is that the war has to be much more dynamic, especially because of the presence of drones. If you had it set up like that, the Russians would just throw in a bunch of drones and artillery, and your fortifications would be gone. The fortifications there really work more or less as obstacles that you have to go around or overcome, which buy you time. And for example, you can jump into them if the Russians are gathering in that area. But most Ukrainians are hidden in scattered small foxholes or underground bunkers and shelters, which are hidden in various places in the forest. When a Russian attack is focused on a certain section of the front, they come out of those shelters. Sometimes drones fly out from there and they gather at the spot where the Russians are trying to break through. I always compare it to the reaction of blood cells or platelets, that they kind of circulate, they're spread out in some way, and when there's an infection or a breach in the body's defense, everything rushes there to plug it up so the attack can't get any further. So that's how the defense has been working for some time now. And as we can see, it's working quite well, because even though there are simply hundreds and hundreds of military and combat clashes and hundreds of attacks all along the front, the advances are more or less very, very small. The movement of the front is minimal, and even though the Russians are focusing on the area of Pokrovsk and Kosti, we see that the front is more or less not stagnating, but moving very slowly. And we know that Russian losses are high during these frequent attacks, and as we can see, the advances are relatively small. Now let's look at the economic part, and the economic part is that, as a reminder, the 90 billion for Ukraine has been approved and released. There is no longer any blockage, so it's not exactly breaking news, but it is something positive. Of course, it's still possible that there will be further negotiations about this, mainly because Peter Magyar will probably want to use the fact that he won't block these billions to maybe exchange them for the billions that Brussels is blocking for Hungary. But besides this happening, the 20th was also approved. It includes, for example, a ban on providing Russia with service for its LNG terminals and gas infrastructure in general, which I find pretty bizarre that up until now, European companies could provide Russia with service, repairs, modifications, and maintenance for LNG and these kinds of things. And now that won't be possible anymore. But it's always surprising what the sanctions package brings, and people wonder, or at least I wonder, how the heck it was even possible that this could go on until now. Why have we been doing this for Russia until now? There are various arguments, different explanations. For example, with LNG, the argument is, of course, that until now, we largely needed it to keep flowing somehow, because many European countries were at least partly buying Russian gas. Now, since those contracts are ending and there are other ways to get LNG and other sources of these gases, it makes sense to ban it. Yes, so that when we no longer need it, nobody profits from it or provides that service to Russia. Another interesting thing, for example, are the secondary sanctions on certain countries and companies that help Russia circumvent the sanctions. Secondary sanctions are actually quite new, at least on the scale included in the 20th package. Yeah, with those, you always have to be careful because with secondary sanctions, it's not good to overdo it. We don't want to accidentally cut ourselves off from the global market this way, so it's important to keep it balanced. But what's quite interesting is that the import of ammonia from Russia has been restricted. That basically means the resources used to produce fertilizers, and it's not that it's completely banned, but an import quota has been imposed which sets the maximum amount that can be imported from Russia. I assume that the import quota will be more about price levels than about tons, because the main goal is not to let Russia profit too much, rather than to stop importing from Russia altogether, if you know what I mean. The important thing is to make sure Russia doesn't make money, not that it doesn't export things. It's the same with oil, right? The whole effort was to make Russia earn as little as possible from oil, but at the same time to export as much oil as possible to push the price of oil down even further, right? So it's good to remember that we played a big role in making oil relatively cheap and pushing the price down quickly by saying, hey, we won't buy it from Russia. They had to find new buyers. And as a result, Russia had to lower its price and increase production. Of course, this flooded the global oil market with more oil, and that in turn led to a global drop in oil prices. So that's largely thanks to our great work. However, yeah, the 20th package of sanctions was adopted and it includes these things. What's also interesting about what's happening regarding Russia is that there will be a parade. Of course, there will be a parade on Red Square to mark the anniversary of the end of the Great Patriotic War on the 9th of May. But this time it will probably be without military vehicles, and it's being justified by the operational situation at the front. It will be without military equipment. So we'll see. Of course, we'll watch the parade together and then we'll do some comparison of the parades over time and we'll see how much the decline will be visible. It's always good to look at how visible the decline is, and last time it was quite interesting how dominant a role the Chinese president had. So today, and this year again, it will be interesting to observe who has what position, how the whole thing is arranged, and what the Kremlin actually reveals to us through the way they present their parade. So I'm already looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the military parade. It's going to be really interesting. However, what can we say in conclusion? There was a big drone exchange here. You could say that the Russians won in terms of casualties in the sense that they managed to injure and kill more Ukrainians. As for the damage and pain caused by the Russians, it has been really significant over the past week. When it comes to the strikes on ports, residential buildings, and even infrastructure, the damage was significant. There were also thousands of missiles. But the Ukrainians are still succeeding in destroying refineries in two ops. They continue to successfully harass the oil and refining industry of the Russian Federation. And even though oil prices are high, when it comes to the profits and the Russians' ability to produce oil products and sell the highest value products, the Ukrainians have made sure that this has dropped by a significant percentage. Of course, it's not a reduction by half or anything like that, but it's simply a 10 to 20% reduction, whether in revenues or production, which is already showing up in the budget, definitely. And I would like to say that the Russians themselves realize, and various defenders of Russia should realize as well, that the high fuel prices and high oil prices we have right now because of Trump, Hormuz, and Iran are more of a short-lived phase. It won't last long. It probably won't even last until the end of the summer, and a few months of very high oil revenues will definitely help. will definitely help the Russian budget, but it won't save it. It's more like a band-aid, an injection that allows Russia to function a bit longer in a somewhat normal mode, but it's more of a postponement of the inevitable, that is, the total collapse of Russian society and the economy due to the absolutely insane demographic crisis caused by the war and the economic crisis caused by the war-focused, militarized structure of the economy. So that's how it is. That's the current situation. We'll see how it develops further. Follow the content, like, share, comment, help make it more visible. And if you like it, you can also contribute financially here via QR codes, PayPal, or even a regular bank transfer. You can do all of this. This is how you can support this independent news outlet, which brings you information from all over the world, but mainly focuses on the war. Join the streams because there we often put together these informational segments and videos with everyone there, and we'll see each other again next time.